Hey everybody, happy Sunday and welcome to episode 2 of the Stock Trading Pit. We have 4 segments as always, 2 special guests, with segment 1 being Talking with Traders as Dan interviews Nick Giannotti talking about his overall style and how he looks at the markets. Segment 2 is going to be the broad market recap looking at SPY, QQQ, IWM, and VIX. Segment 3 is going to be the watch list, and I interview NebraskanGooner about some stocks he's watching into the week ahead, as well as crypto going into the week ahead. Segment 4 is going to be weekend chart requests, and we have 5 to go over today. So sit back, relax, and let's get started.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. This is Talking with Traders, and today we've got a very special and very interesting trader as our guest, Nick Giannotti, or as you probably know him on social media as Gnats. So Nick, thank you for joining us today. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Can't complain. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. So I'm really happy to have you on today.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You as well.
Definitely. So let's get into it. The first question I want to ask you, and I think a lot of people in the audience would love to hear your answer to this, is what brought you into the trading world? How'd you get your start here?
So what really brought me into the trading world was when I was around 17. I opened a joint account with my father. And the reason was because my neighbor was actually a trader, and he told me, I always kind of listened to him when he was talking about stocks, and it kind of got me interested. And ever since a young age, I was all about working and, trying to better myself for the future. And that's what really got me into that. So, I did a joint account with my father, and from there I just started trading.
That's fascinating. Did you have full discretion over your decisions there, or was your father participating in them?
It was my money. It's just at that point, because I was only 18, that I had a joint account, or at least I believe I did. Yes.
Got it. That's always fascinating. So how'd you get into the technical side of trading? Because it's one thing to have a brokerage account and to buy some stocks. It's a whole different part, of the world to look at a chart and try to predict future movement based on the past.
Yeah. The technical side was honestly from everyone that I met in the trading world, whether it be Discord, whether it be Twitter, StockTwits, you can name basically any site. And that's where I kind of learned that from. Kind of before that, I was really just going off of hope and luck.
Hopium.
And then I started to, gather information and learn a couple of things. And that was definitely one of the key things that has propelled me to being a better trader today.
A lot of new traders start off that way. I know I did, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's just like, hey, I don't know. I started in 08, so I don't even remember the companies, but it was like, this is a company that I like, right? So I'm going to try to trade its stock because I think it will go up. Learning a lesson from doing that is what brought me into the technical side of things, right? Because I had to realize there was, there has to be some way to know you're wrong, right? So when you trade, do you tend to swing trade? Do you tend to build positions? Are you more of an in and out in the same day, cash at night day trader? What's your style like?
Really it's all three, sorts of styles that you just stated. I definitely do day trade. I would say most of my trading is swing trading. And, to think of it, how crazy it is in this current market where a headline can move the stock market up, 3 to 4% or down 3 to 4%, depending on COVID, depending on anything. So it's kind of crazy that currently that's one of my biggest, styles, but that's where I'm currently at. And of course I have, portfolios with just dividends that I'm trying to reinvest and, grow that so I could get basically a passive income over the years, and just a longer term portfolio on stocks that I like over the long term.
That makes a lot of sense. How do you deal with because I swing trade too, right? And it's very euphoric when something's running, especially if you happen to be in it early enough for you to have nice gains. But it's time, and stocks do not go straight one way or the other; they zigzag.
Sure.
So the drawdowns are very unsettling at times. How do you deal with that in a swing trade? And when you say, as just a follow-on question, that when you say a swing trade, do you mean weeks or months, or how long do you swing for?
Okay. So when I'm talking about swing trading, me personally, I'm mainly focusing on options when I'm talking about swing trading. And for that reason, and for the headlines that are obviously, can come out every other day, I like to focus basically at least 1 month time out. So if we're in, what are we, January 14th, 13th right now? January 13th, I'd like to be February 19th, the earliest. I believe that's the monthly contract for February. But I would prefer 2 to 3 months out. And one, it's, a little bit safer. And I think it's just the route that has helped me a lot. I mean, I used to do weeklies, 24/7. And, that's where you could either make a lot of money or you could lose a lot of money. And I was on the second part of that. With that said, I do dabble into them, time and time again, but now I'm a lot more cautious and a lot more, I wait for the right position, I should say, for the weeklies now.
Okay. That's a good segue to my next question, which is, for you, what is the right position or the right setup, right? What do you look for in a chart before you consider trading it? And how do you define like your holy grail, right? The setup that you have the most consistent performance with?
So, one setup that I really like a lot that I could say, TrendSpider taught me, was the volume shelf. I mean, I never used the side volume bars until you guys, or I believe Jake was the one who really pushed it on me. Not to throw anyone else down the pit, but Jake definitely, grabbed me on that one. Trying to find ascending triangles, just trying to find any pattern that just really spots my eye that I've, can recognize on a daily basis. For example, if we wanted to bring up a chart, the chart SE, one example of a chart I like, or a pattern I like to see, is this cupping formation here on SE. And you can see we had a breakout today going into right around the 230 range. Broke out right from around the 214, 215 range, and then went $15 higher the next day. So those are the type of patterns or charts that I like to see that could, basically attract my eye.
That's that volume shelf on the right is huge there. It's a lot of
Yeah,
volume.
I also didn't change it, but yeah, I do, like I said, that's one thing I definitely learned from you guys, and it just definitely helped me a lot, trying to focus on the point of control and, the volume weighted average price there with the volume shelves.
So with this chart here, would you then sell when price kind of approaches that upper diagonal trend line there?
Mm-hmm.
Is that basically your style, play the range?
Yeah, so I actually got in on the candle right before the breakout yesterday, breaking out of the cupping formation. And the reason was for that is because I could see that we were testing this area and I liked this inside day here. And then we broke out of it. And I actually sold basically all my position yesterday off that break and the rest today into that 230 range. So mine was, basically touching that. I got in on the touch of that breakout area. And because I saw the inside day of the candle before, and I had a good feeling that it would break out going forward. And over the past 2 days, it definitely did.
It's a beautiful trade. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So I'm curious, how did you find this symbol? Was this a scanner? Did you see it on FinTwits? How do you come across your opportunities?
So, I mean, I personally have a chat room, and one good thing that I really love about, the people in it is, they share their ideas, we go over things, and this is one of the names that popped up, and I forgot who exactly, talked about it, but this definitely caught my eye, and I brought up a chart and I showed the cupping formation, and that's when I entered. So it was basically piggybacking off of someone in my room who shared the idea.
It's the best way to go. I'd say 80% of my ideas off Twitter or just other
Yeah,
traders who I respect.
yeah. That too.
So
That too.
yeah, yeah. So that's really cool. Thank you for sharing that. Do you look for cup type of formations a lot? Is that one of your kind of go-to patterns, or is that just what happens to be on this chart right now?
Um, I mean, it just happens to be on the chart. I mean, I've actually seen it a lot more recently. Um, I mean, another chart, if we wanted to bring one up, going back is JMIA. Forgive me for all the lines I have here. Um, I mean, I guess you consider this one right here. You could see it's cupping there. Obviously, it fell down and they brought it down, but you could see it continued right back up to that 50. I guess you consider this, a cupping formation as well as, kind of a broken handle. It went halfway, so it's not that bad. And you could see the breakout going, forward for JMIA. I've seen this, pattern a lot recently over the past couple of weeks and months compared to before, I think, which is pretty interesting to see. But it's just basically any pattern that I see. I set my lines, I set my alerts, and if it starts to break one way or another, I try to position in that regard to which way it's going.
Got it. So I'm curious. You mentioned alerts. Do you use alerts to kind of trigger trades, or do you use them for like stop losses and profit targets more?
So me personally, when I don't usually use stop losses. If anything, it's mental, just because, what I hear and what I see in the past is they do actually attack the stops, as many people have suggested.
Mhm.
But I kind of use it as profit targets going up. And, I just have mental stops in general, other than that.
I'm the same way. It's a very conflicting kind of
Yeah.
controversial topic, right? Like some traders, will tell you that never trade without a hard stop, right? And I've never been successful that way. I feel like I get wicked out every
Yeah, me
time.
either.
So I definitely see where you're coming from. The problem with mental stops is they're mental though, right?
Yeah.
Because it'll pull back and you're like, maybe I should reconsider my stop, and you end up moving it lower and lower and lower and lower.
Sure.
How do you avoid that? With a mental stop, do you just
Um,
treat it like a hard stop, where
yeah.
essentially, okay,
Um, yeah. I mean, like you were saying, I don't like to keep it strict. So let's just say, for example, because we have this up, if I was to enter down here when it was starting to, I guess you could say, base a little bit, my mental stop would be like a break of this level, this 3140 level, 3120 level. If I entered it around 35, because then, it's starting to go to new levels down. And if it broke below that, it would look a little weak to me. So I would be
okay.
able to risk, I guess a 10% drop here. Because I wouldn't really have a big position as well. So it's not like it would kill me in the end.
That's a great point for a lot of people who are listening here to just kind of take in, right? Position size is everything, I've
Yes,
found.
it is.
And I'm sure you'll agree, right? If you have a small position following or appropriately sized position, I don't use small and big, right? Just appropriate size. For me at least, an appropriate size is a position that doesn't make me emotional if it's going against me, right?
Mhm.
And I think a lot of traders get wicked out on things and mess up their own trades because they oversize and start to get nervous with those big red numbers.
Yeah. And I mean, I've been through it before too. I definitely have oversized in the past, and I sell a little bit too early, and then a day or two later, it's way over your entry, and you're left in the dust basically.
Yep. Now, do you ever add to positions on pullbacks? Say it's going
Yeah,
against you. Okay.
yeah. That's something that I've really started to gather a lot more over the past couple of months. Um, and that actually started with the change of my position sizing. I was going a little bit heavier, but then I started, a little bit lower, a little bit slower. And, I'm able to add on these pullbacks. And that's where for the options players at least, or even, the shares players as well. For the options players, when you play, these 2 to 3 month out contracts, you're not going to be down, 25, 50% in a trade right away when you're playing that far out, unless it's a massive drop. Compared to the weekly players where, you will be down that amount if it drops, a couple dollars or something like that, depending on the stock price of the stock and, the contracts and everything. That's where I feel like my strategy has helped me. And not saying it's my strategy. It's, it's just I would prefer time over, basically the risk of only having so little time. And yeah, so it's really helped me in that regard as well, to be able to add on these dips.
Got it. A question for you. I see an RSI and a stochastic on your chart. Do you use those often? How do you use those indicators?
I really don't use them often. I kind of just put them on a few weeks ago, because people have had them on in my room, and I just kind of play with them. I usually have always just gone off the charts, and it's just something good to have on, just to double check yourself. You could set trend lines on these too if there's a pattern forming. So it's just something good to have, I guess. But I just truly focus on charts. I do take a look now here and then though.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, cool. I appreciate you sharing that. I'm sure a lot of people appreciate that as well. What are some what's an interesting sector or stock that you're kind of watching for the next few weeks, the next few months? What do you got your eye on now?
So what I'm looking at right now is what everyone else is. These EVs. I mean, they just keep going, or something related to it, just as the batteries, the chargers, stuff like that. I mean, look at Plug. It was a $5 stock. Now it's a $70 stock. And over the past few days, it went from 30 to 70. FCEL, another one, they just keep going up. You could name so many names, and the amount of lives that could have been changed if you stood in those trades it's crazy. It's a crazy time right now. Almost, if you could think about it, being a bubble. But you just don't know when it's going to pop. You don't know if it's going to continue or not. So you wait for the pullbacks and, start a little position. If it works out, it works out. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Set your stops and be ready.
That's good advice. Okay, cool. So we're running a little low in time, so I'll jump to my very last question here.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a special question. I ask this to everybody who comes on the show, who I get the pleasure of interviewing. And it's one that a lot of traders who watch the show really like to hear the answers to. So let's say you meet somebody who's brand new to trading. What advice would you give them?
For sure, never give up. That's that's the one thing I hear a lot. Whether I'm getting direct messages on Twitter, or even just my friends texting me and stuff like that. You're gonna have bad trades, you're gonna have good trades. You gotta learn from both of them. It took me a while to understand that. I was never going to give up, but just in general, it took me a while to understand that. And from looking back at the losers, looking back at the winners, I learned, patterns. I learned, basically candlesticks, how, some react with others. I learned about volume. I learned about, basically price action. I learned about everything. And I still have a lot more to learn. But that is one thing, never give up. Just focus on what went wrong and what went right on the good trades, and use that to your advantage. And, it's not about hitting home runs in every trade. You need to be able to build up that portfolio for the future. Not about going from 1,000 to 1,000,000 in one day.
That never happens anyway. So.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Nick. For coming on, for sharing your insights, for pointing everybody's attention at the EV market. Because I'll be honest, I've been bitter at that market since I lost money on NEO.
Yeah.
And I've kind of pushed it off my screens, right? But I probably should take a look at it, and probably a lot of people here. And when this airs on Sunday, we'll see how it's gone for the rest of the week.
Yeah.
So thank you again, Nick. It's been a pleasure. And I guess we'll go over to Jake for the broad market recap.
All right, everybody, let's look at the broad markets going into the week ahead. And remember, next week is the, when the inauguration is, and there's clearly been a little uncertainty around just everything going on, how exactly everything's going to play out. Obviously, there's a lot of troops in DC right now, which is definitely creating uncertainty in the markets. But also, you have to remember Friday was an options expiration day. And we did have quite a bit of volatility on Friday. One thing that I want to point out here is the fact that we did have a pretty decent down day on SPY, yet we had a green raindrop. Now, essentially all that means is that the volume weighted average price for the second half of the day was higher than the first half of the day. So, this isn't a magic divergence indicator showing we had a red day versus a green raindrop, but it is something to note, as I have seen some interesting moves after this type of setup where we do have a red day, a green raindrop, and then you have a move up the next day. So with the uncertainty into next week, we will keep in mind that the next couple days may be a little weird, and Monday is a holiday, so keep that in mind as well for the markets. But into the weekly side of things, we can see that we do have quite the ascending wedge forming. This is something that we touched on last week. And you can see we're getting pretty close to the apex of this wedge, and we really have a make or break moment coming here. Do we break to the upside? Do we break to the downside? We'll just have to see what happens. But either way, we are going to have a move within the next couple weeks. I mean, we could technically just melt up a little more into the very tip of this wedge, but generally that doesn't happen. But who knows? It could this time around. But all in all, not a ton of movement for SPY and really any of the markets. IWM had a decent week, but for SPY at least, we are kind of trading in a pretty tight range over the last, let's say, week and a half. So going into the Qs, we do have a little more of a, I don't know how to, what do I say here? Representation of just the candle and the raindrop together. Red raindrop, red candle on Friday. You can see here that we're still trading in a pretty tight channel here. So, just kind of trading within this range until we either break to the upside or the downside. We're going to kind of just have that status quo being the same. Now, on the weekly side of things, this is the same setup that we had last week. We pretty much just have this measured move from August 2020 all the way down to September of 2020 on the weekly side of things. You can see here that the 1.618 extension is around $330. And, if you were using any extension or any upper part of the chart, remember, you can always go in and create an alert on any of these areas to be alerted when the price action does get to that area or near it. And this is a case study that I wanted to talk about on IWM. Notice here on the weekly side of things, you can see here that we almost tested this 1.618 extension perfectly. However, we did not get exactly to this line. Now, this is where the sensitivity alert really comes into play. And if we did create a zone around this line rather than just the precise 1.618 extension, you'll see that we would have been able to capture that price action here. So remember, when you're looking at a zone rather than an exact area, the sensitivity alerts on TrendSpider are really helpful because this does allow you to have a little bit of wiggle room there, and you don't have to be right on the money with some of these areas that you're watching. So we did miss that barely. However, this would be an area of interest possibly for sellers to step in. Remember, the 1.618 extension becomes kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy a lot of the time just because so many people are watching it. Now, on the weekly side of things, what I want to do is I want to point out the fact that we did have a balloon breakout out of this ascending wedge here. And this is a great example showing you that balloon breakouts or anything in the market is not going to work 100% of the time. We had the volume above resistance. This was pretty much textbook. And then we had our pullback. So that is something to keep in mind. I do want to point out too that we did have this green raindrop, even though we had a down day on IWM. And you can see a majority of the volume is actually at the top of the range here for Friday. So, was Friday just a weird options expiration day, kind of burning some premium. We'll have to see. But all in all, this is showing that risk is definitely on. IWM is small caps. It's definitely more of a risk on kind of view here. So the fact that we did close pretty solid for the week on IWM tells me that risk is definitely still on. But we'll have to see how that plays out into the coming weeks. And we do have some things to keep in mind going into the week ahead that may add to the volatility. Now, on the VIX side of things, we did have a little bit of an uptick on VIX into Friday, but for the move down we had on Friday morning, I would have expected a bigger move up in the VIX. Now, we still are pretty much trading in a very tight range here. It does look like we're coiling a little bit, but all in all, the gap below still remains, the gap above still remains, and these would probably be the targets that people are looking at either to the upside or the downside. And then on the weekly side of things, remember, we do have this gap here from the weekly gap up in February of 2020. And let's see if that actually fills at some point in the coming weeks or months, or we just continue to trade within this range, possibly move up to the upside if there is some uncertainty. Now, if everything goes well on January 20th, that would definitely be a little bit of stability for the market. At least there's not a ton of uncertainty around that date and that event that's happening with the presidency. However, anything can happen. Remember, the VIX is not something that is really that chartable. The reason I want to look at the VIX most of the time is really just these gaps. So these gaps to the upside and the downside would be something to keep in mind. So that is it for the broad markets. Hopefully everybody enjoyed this segment, looking at just the overall kind of perspective into the week ahead. Remember, my perspective is one of a million. So really, there's a ton of different ways to look at the markets, but these are some ways that you can look at the markets using TrendSpider. And hopefully this was helpful. Now, as we move into the next segment, sit back, relax, and let's get to it. Hey everybody, welcome to segment 3, the watch list. We have special guest NebraskanGooner to go over some stocks as well as crypto going into the week ahead. So Gooner, thank you for joining us. And if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your trading style, and then we can jump right into these charts and see what you're seeing.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it. So I've pretty much been trading full time since August of last year. I really like low time frame scalping as far as intraday trading, but especially for crypto. But on the stock side of things, I really like swing trading in high time frames, and I like that the market closes and I can kind of just forget about these in the evening and come back next day for them. So what I have here is actually Tilray, one of my weed stocks that I've been investing in, and I really like this chart. One of my favorite charts. I'm really bullish on weed stocks as a whole sector this year. Tilray was just kind of my big pick. So I'll show you guys kind of what I've been looking at here as far as why I like it so much. You see this obvious clear downtrend here, and we've got a breakout here. I love how TrendSpider highlights these. It's really cool. And then what you see here is a nice consolidation above, right? Nice consolidation. Not only that, whoops, wrong thing. Oh well. Not only that, we actually have this really high volume breakout here of this trend line. And that's really key for me. This volume tells me a lot. You guys that are into crypto, if you remember that 3,000 bottom we had, and then that 4,200 breakout on really high volume, that was kind of the signal on Bitcoin that we might see an uptrend. And that was basically the bottom. And we're seeing the similar thing on Tilray. Nice high volume breakout, consolidation with a higher breakout, and now we're seeing high volume exiting out of here. I'm expecting at least $30 here in the near term as far as my short-term target, but overall I'm thinking there's no reason that it can't reach all-time highs. And you see this really high volume breakdown here, this really harsh rejection candle. If we can break above this at around $43, $45, it's going to be pretty much open air from up there. You see OBV, our on balance volume, super strong, breaking out, showing that buyers are really strong here, making new all-time highs. I mean, this is just beautiful. And my favorite thing about this is that OBV has been pushing hard here, right? So you see this arrow, maybe. See this arrow up here, right? Nice and strong push. And price had really not done much at all. And now we're starting to see that follow through. So volume precedes price action more times than not. And you see this high volume coming in here with price stagnant. That usually leads to a pop. So really good looking chart, really a beautiful move here. And I'm expecting continuation.
Nice. Wheat stocks have definitely have a nice seasonal trend, at least historical performance in the beginning of the year too. So that was interesting. On CGC, it had a very similar type of seasonality. So it wasn't the best December, but into January, these things have really ramped back up the first 2 weeks of the new year, and it's definitely going to be interesting to see where these go from here. And when you're kind of entering, I know you're looking at the higher time frames to actually kind of map out where you think price is going, but are you generally entering on the daily candle, the hourly, or?
That would depend on the chart and the asset. For this one, I actually had my first entry at about 474.
Nice.
And that was based on my indicator that we talked about before the segment, Top Goon X. It gave a buy signal over here, or a buy signal approaching, I should say. And on that, I would buy the 0.786 fib of the move up. 0.786 fib happened to be around 450. So that was either the bottom or it wasn't. So I took an initial position here, averaged up a little bit to about $5. And then we got this breakout. I was able to add more on confirmation.
Beautiful. All righty. Well, so that is Tilray. Let's look at some crypto. I know you're really focused more on crypto than stocks, but it seems like you have been trading some stocks more lately. So if you do LTC USD, that will put you in. There you go.
Which one? Which one should I do? Does it matter for USD?
Bitfinex is good.
Oh, Bitfinex. Oh yeah, definitely not this chart. Finex. There we go. All right. So yeah, let's take a look at Litecoin here. This is one I've been following for quite some time. I had said it's probably going to lag Bitcoin, but catches up pretty hard. So at some point, I'm expecting a really strong move out of this that's going to probably kind of catch everyone off guard as everyone's paying attention to Bitcoin. And then all of a sudden, Litecoin is going to be above 200, probably hit $300 and before anybody even has time to really realize it, So One thing I noticed here is, again, nice strong OBV. That's great. We have a nice breakout here. You can see this nice long resistance here. So that's good for a move going forward. Yes, we can get a pullback. Can we get a little bit more downside potentially? But as far as this chart as a whole, you see this nice round bottom. We've got an initial reaccumulation breakout here. Okay, nice green highlighted. I love that. Nice higher lows. And we've got this nice strong breakout now. And at some point, you're always going to get a retest. You got this nice retest here. All right. So this is a weekly time frame. Obviously, we're seeing a lot more supports being developed here than we're seeing resistances. I apologize for my sporadic chart here. But you see this nice drop being bought up really quickly.
One thing I was going to mention with on-balance volume, it's interesting to see how big of a flush we got there, but you can see that the on-balance volume barely ticked down at all.
Right.
Is that something you look for when you see price action versus OBV and that type of thing?
Yeah. So one thing that can happen here is we could actually continue. So that basically causes a bullish divergence. But not only that, we can actually get a dropping pattern. So let me get this. Yeah. So one thing you can actually see is a drop like this that gives you a consolidation here of higher lows with OBV. And then you'll still get that bullish divergence. You can have price drop or consolidate here for a while. Or, we could get next week buyback, a little bit more drop downside the week after, and create a bullish divergence here and a bull pennant type consolidation. And then that's actually a really bullish sign because you see price dropping, but on balance volume isn't dropping, saying that the volume of sellers isn't there as relation to price. So as long as our OBV is uptrending, it's a really good indicator of strength, especially in bull markets. A lot of people will use RSI in bull markets and see a lot of bearish divergences. Well, OBV bearish divergence is usually going to be more reliable in bull markets because you're going to see that volume start to deplete at the tops. Whereas you can see here at the top of the last move, we got this double top on OBV, and that was our top here.
Makes sense to me.
Whereas here we just continue to, we just continue to make higher lows. Why isn't it letting me? Sorry. How come it's not letting me drag OBV now? Did I do something?
I should be able to just drag it at the right at that top near the volume and pull it down.
Oh, I was trying to make it bigger like this, but it's not doing it now.
So yeah, the OBV making it bigger, it's a function. It's tied to price. So if you try to optimize the y-axis, it's actually not going to change it.
Oh, it let me do it a minute ago though, unless it's because I zoomed in, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so let's go this. Sorry, but you can see here, regardless of all this price action down here, OBV kept trending higher and higher, telling me that we were actually in a reaccumulation phase and that we were going to eventually pop out of this range. And you see here, as OBV broke out of this lower range here and consolidated, similar to what I talked about here. Price hadn't really moved much yet, but OBV had already broken out down here and we got takeoff. So basically what I'm expecting is at some point, it already looks like buyers were really quick to come in down at these levels. My buy zone, as I'd mentioned on Twitter, was 126 to 140 area. That's kind of where I wanted to get ads at, but I'd basically just been accumulating down here for the last, 6 months, waiting for liftoff.
Beautiful. And do you look at the ratios of Litecoin to Bitcoin or anything like that, or you focus mostly on the US dollar pair?
Yes, I think in a bull market, it's pretty important to look at the Bitcoin pairing because obviously if Litecoin's extremely bearish in the Bitcoin pairing, then you're more well suited just to be sitting in Bitcoin, letting Bitcoin do its thing, show its strength. And then once the attention turns to altcoins like Litecoin, take advantage of that. And I think that's one reason that Litecoin is lagging behind is because the Bitcoin pairing hasn't been too, and we can actually look at that. As you see here, the reason Litecoin hasn't taken off yet is because the Bitcoin pairing hasn't taken off. We don't have any strong high volume breakout on this like we had on Tilray, all right? We're still in the downtrend. We actually got rejected. So we don't have this high volume breakout that we had on Tilray, and that's why the market has reacted appropriately on Litecoin Bitcoin pairing. So once we see something like this with some high volume breakout, that's when Litecoin is really going to shine, and you're going to see this huge uproar and this huge move. And again, look at OBV. Our on balance volume is actually breaking down here with a retest while price was going up. So that tells me again that it's just not ready yet. So we need to see OBV uptick hard, whether we see buyers step in and get us a bullish engulfing to give us a nice V here on OBV and show some strength. But we need some volume breakout of here for the rest of the market to say, okay, it's go time for Litecoin. Other investors will take notice. And then that's when you get that effect of everyone piling in. All right, so let's take a look at Zcash here. We'll look at the USD pairing. This is what I've kind of been watching. I saw a similar pattern on this one as some other charts. But basically, we've got a reaccumulation phase here with a breakout. Okay. So we've got this nice reaccumulation here after this V bottom. So we basically got a V bottom here, nice volume coming out of here, and then a reaccumulation. And this is where price isn't breaking down from support. We've got this nice strong support here after breakout that's holding well. All right. And now we're just kind of reaccumulating and everyone's reaccumulating. And then at some point you see this volume come in, nice volume breakout again, nice volume breakout. We've got our retest here. If I move my line just slightly, got a nice retest here and continuation. And that high volume is when the rest of the market takes notice. And that's when, like I mentioned earlier with Litecoin, everyone will start piling in. And what you can see here is that OBV actually gave us an early signal. All right. And I bet if I go back, I can find some more support here, but we won't go that far back. But anyway, you can see this nice breakout here where OBV actually broke a new high while ZEC was just consolidating here in this reaccumulation phase. That's a really good signal for me to say, okay, it's time to take notice of this and time to start building a position for this inevitable breakout. And you can see here it followed through. So
it's really interesting
preceding price action.
Yeah, it's interesting to see in the summer of 2019, you had prices similar to where we are now, except the OBV was much lower than it is now. So that's definitely a sign too that, strength is coming in.
Yep. So then you just kind of zoom out to that resistance and you can see we're at that resistance line now. But obviously OBV is stronger and we're actually even breaking this resistance on OBV. So that's a great sign. And that's telling us that buyers are basically in control right now until proven otherwise. So as long as we see a close above this breakdown here, okay, pretty high volume breakdown, pretty bearish candle here. Once we see a close above here, I mean, it's pretty open air up until at least 250-ish right here. So got some pretty good upside to come from that if we can get this strong close up here.
Beautiful. Yeah, Zcash is one I haven't really paid attention to on the crypto side. I'm gonna have to put this one on the watch list for sure.
Yeah, it's a privacy coin. So, with the SEC, from an FA standpoint, with the SEC cracking down on things, you might see some of these privacy coins starting to get more people involved in them.
Interesting. Okay. Good to know.
And lastly, let's look at ZRX. And this is one that I really actually like the BTC pairing a lot. The USD pairing looks great as well. But let's take a look at the Bitcoin pairing. And basically, we're going to go to the daily for this one because this was kind of my signal. First off, Jake, what do you notice on this chart? Just eyeballing it.
Lower lows, but higher on balance volume compared to those previous candles. 2 weeks ago?
Right. Look at this. Look at that nice strong OBV, and price has hardly moved. Not only that, look at this candle right here. Right.
Beautiful.
So not only is that a nice high volume candle, but it's not into resistance. It's actually out of the trend line resistance. If I go all the way up there, I've got a nice clean trend line breakout. There we go. Okay. So you see this really nice downtrend breakout on really high volume. And then we're holding this key support, which is a really good sign. And on my other charts, this is actually an EMA that I use as support. And now you're seeing high volume breakout, consolidation, low volume sell off, and then high volume out of the range, kind of like we saw on Tilray, right? And then OBV is just skyrocketing here. So we would expect, a break to the next resistance up here seems pretty likely on the BTC pairing, which if we go to the USD pairing, which I like the...
What is that, zero coin? I'm not too into
Ox.
crypto, so I'm glad.
It's Ox. Yeah, I guess it's Ox is what I usually call it. I don't know. 0x. It is a zero. It's on Coinbase though and Binance. I actually don't know much about the project other than I've traded it a bunch.
Makes sense.
But yeah, why don't we just go to Coinbase quick? And basically what you'll see here again is look at our OBV, right? Nice and strong, new highs. What did price do? You see that OBV was breaking out here, right? Making new highs, and price was still below resistance.
Mm-hmm.
So we broke a new high here, price still at resistance. What do you think is going to happen? We're going to continue upwards. Now we've got this nice support retest, and what happened there? I actually really like the weekly chart on this though, because we have basically a reaccumulation pattern again. Not only that, we have a new weekly high on balance volume, nice bullish pattern here. Okay. And then this reaccumulation breakout on high volume. All right. So you get your uptrend, reaccumulate, high volume breakout, market takes notice from there, low volume sell off. We still have time left in the week, but as long as this retest holds and this area holds, the market's going to take notice of that. And we should see upside to at least this resistance around 70 cents.
Beautiful. Well, these were all some great charts and some great things to watch going into the weeks ahead. And it's really interesting that you do use these higher time frames, because a lot of people are so focused on these shorter term time frames. And I think one of the biggest issues in trading is people will go trade something on the weekly chart, and then they'll be watching the 15-minute chart and be obsessed about price action on the 15-minute chart. So if you're watching price action on a shorter term time frame, but you're trading on a longer term time frame, you're likely going to have some emotions come in, because you're just obsessing about price action that you didn't even make the trade on. So I like the fact that you did focus more on the longer term, the weekly and the daily, and really appreciate you coming on and sharing your thoughts on these. And for those that do not trade crypto, NebraskanGooner is a great person to follow on Twitter. He really focuses on crypto, but he also is focusing on the weed stocks, just because there's an opportunity there in the market. And before we head out, anything else you want to add? I just want to thank you again for joining us and going over some of these charts.
No, that's all I've got. Thanks for having me, and awesome platform. I really enjoy using it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, everybody. We will jump into the next segment here in a second, and let's move on. Alrighty, let's look at some chart requests going into the week ahead. Remember, we always post just a tweet about what charts everybody wants to see on the weekend show. Now, these 5 charts that we're going to go over are just really the most popular charts that were requested. A lot of these tickers I saw over and over again, and that's why I chose them. Now, Zoom is the first one we'll go over, and Zoom is one that is really interesting, especially with the case study on the gap here. Notice that this gap below is one that we really touched on a couple months back. And this thing finally tried to fill the gap this week, did not fully fill. And then we had a pretty strong move up over the last 4 days from Tuesday to Friday. And the thing about this is this just proves that you don't have to always fill the gap, either the gap to the upside or the downside. So something to consider when you are looking at gaps as potential areas of interest below or above. Now, the other thing that I want to point out here is the fact that we have these very defined solid hollow candles. So the hollow candle is just the chart type. Hollow candle is essentially the candles that I personally like to use. And you'll notice every time that we've kind of found a short-term top here, we've had this hollow candle. And remember, this solid candle. Remember, when you're using hollow candles, anytime you have a solid candle, it essentially means, in this case, for this gray candle, we closed above the previous day's close. However, the close was lower than the open. So if you're looking at these solid candles, kind of imagine it being a shade. So when you're pulling the shade down on a window, your open is at the top, your close is at the bottom. So you're closing the shade. And then when your open is at the bottom and your close is at the top, you're opening the shade up, and that's where you get the hollow candle from. So in this case, we do have that solid candle on Friday, and let's see if that actually follows through with how it has in the past couple months. Every time we've had one, at least on a short-term bounce, we have had that pullback. So will this be the same? We'll have to see. But on the weekly side of things, you can see this is a relatively strong weekly candle. You can see that I'm using the anchor VWAP handoff approach, which was created by Brian Shannon. So we have this swing low here, or pretty much the bottom in December of 2019. And you can see this is where our original anchored VWAP is. And as we move up, this area here is the last candle to test the original anchored VWAP before moving up. So we anchor another VWAP here. You can see here, this second handoff is essentially the second time that the last, or let me rephrase that. During the first handoff, this is the last time this candle has tested this handoff anchored VWAP. So from here, we anchor another VWAP, and you can see how well price really has respected this area. You can see over the last couple of weeks, we did break down a little bit through this second handoff anchored VWAP. However, it did kind of hold, let's say with a margin of error. I don't know, actually, it was a decent margin of error. So the handoff to anchored VWAP was around 358. And we actually moved down all the way to 331. So this was definitely one with some volatility around that anchored VWAP handoff. However, it did pretty much hold as a line of best fit for the last 3 weeks. And we'll have to see if this continues up going into the week ahead. Now, moving on to our next one, we have Baba. Baba is an interesting one, especially with everything going on with Jack Ma right now. The one thing that I want to point out here is the gap snake. So remember, TrendSpider, you can actually show the gaps either above or below by simply using the gap snake indicator. In this case, you can see here that we have 1 gap, 2 gaps, 3 gaps, and then we have this 1 gap shown by number 4, which partially filled, but it didn't fill fully. So let's see if that actually becomes a target above if we do fill some of these other gaps before that. Now, on the weekly side of things, if we anchor the volume by price from this March low, you'll see here that we have this really defined break-even supply and break-even demand zone with this volume gap in the middle. So what we've done, we anchored the VWAP, or excuse me, the volume by price from this March 23rd low. And then you can see this area highlighted in green. Remember, as all these shares were holding at 218, 220, when the price was all the way in the 300s, these shares were holding at a very strong profit. Now, as the price moves back down, these shares now are back to break even. And so that's why we're calling them break even demand. Now, break even supply is highlighted by this red zone. And so remember, all of these shares holding at 260, 255 to 265 or so, these shares are holding at a loss right now. So as the price moves up to this area, everybody who was holding at a drawdown, especially when we had this big candle here, is back to break even. And some people are going to take their shares and move on once they get back to break even. And that's why we're going to call that break even supply. So all in all, we're trading within this volume gap, which just shows there's not a ton of shares trading within this area. And we'll have to see what happens going into the week ahead. Now, we have had 3 pretty strong weekly candles, but you can see they've been trading kind of within the previous week's range. There hasn't been a really strong move to the upside. They've been kind of just trading within a pretty defined zone here, starting to finally move up a little bit. We did have the highest close we've had in 3 weeks. However, once we get to that 255 to 265 zone, that would be an area where people maybe start to break even and start to sell off, adding to the supply zone. Next one is net. Cloudflare here. We have a pretty strong ascending triangle, and you can see here, let me turn off the gap snake. You can see that this anchored VWAP from the swing low on October 30th acted as a pretty solid level of interest in early January. We moved up. Now we're pulling back to test this ascending triangle support. And notice how I've used 2 trend lines. This is something I like to use a lot. Essentially what I've done here is I've drawn the original trend line, the solid trend line from the wick to this wick right here. And then I've connected another trend line to the body, this lower body, this close here on the week of October 30th. And you'll see here that I just connected it to this area here. And it's really almost a perfectly symmetrical, a parallel line here. And this is something I like to do. You can see here I've done it on the top as well with the horizontal levels, the wick, and then the body, and extending those. And so we have a pretty textbook ascending triangle right now. We'll see what happens going into the week ahead, see if this holds. Now, if we did break down through this trend line, notice that the anchored VWAP is right below that. So that could be a level of interest below if we do break down through these trend lines. Now, on the weekly side of things, what I've done is I've measured the move from the September 2019 high, and then I pretty much measured it all the way down to the October 2019 low. And you can see that this area right around, let's say, $80 has definitely acted as a level of interest for sellers to come in. This is right at that 8.618 extension. Remember, if you are using measured moves, the 0.618 extension is definitely one to keep in mind. It just becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy a lot of the time. So that is net. Moving on to DKNG, Donkey Kong, or DraftKings, whatever you want to call it. Another ascending triangle here on the daily side of things. And you can see here that we have tested this horizontal level of resistance multiple times. And the thing that I want to point out here on the daily side of things, looking at the raindrop, we did break through this area on Thursday, but you can see it's pretty flat here. So if we zoom in, you can see there wasn't a lot of volume. There wasn't a lot of supply being absorbed at the top of the range here. So we know there wasn't a lot of conviction by buyers. And you can see we did have that follow through on Friday. So this is a great example of just making sure to always look to see if there is volume supporting price above this area. But if you remember in the broad market segment, we had an area like this on IWM where we had volume above the resistance line and we had that pullback. So there could just be some OPEC shenanigans going on that happened on Friday. So let's see how next week plays out and kind of go from there. Now, on the weekly side of things, you can see that, let's turn off the volume by price. You can see here that we do have this pretty strong symmetrical triangle forming. And you can see here that we did try to break out. Technically, we closed barely above this resistance line. So if you want to call it a breakout, that's fine. But barely a breakout, if anything. This is where I really can't wait to have those weekly raindrops so we can see what kind of volume there was at the top of this range. And we'll just have to see what happens going into the week ahead. But sports betting and just the overall acceptance of that across the different states has been really skyrocketing lately, and possibly a revenue stream for governments trying to collect some taxes. So DKNG, fairly strong compared to the rest of the market this week. And the last one is Snow. Snowflake is one that really is kind of stuck at this IPO high. So you can see here, I just highlighted the high here. And so I highlighted the top of the IPO high, but then I highlighted where we tested that this area on October 22nd. And you can essentially see that this creates this rectangle that I extended to the right. And you can see that this area has acted as a rough area of resistance a couple times. We'll highlight this red. But it's also acted as an area of potential support and then acted as support for a little bit before continuing down. So we'll highlight this green. And then you can see here that we've acted as resistance multiple times over the last week or two. So all in all, this IPO high, this zone near the IPO around, let's say 301 to 320 has definitely been an area of interest for sellers, but also buyers a couple times. But all in all, the daily doesn't have a ton to go off of. Remember, Snowflake is a relatively new IPO, so there's not a ton of price action to look at. But if we do look at the longer side of things, and when I say longer term side, pretty much from September, since the IPO, we are still forming these higher lows. So still in an uptrend, but definitely kind of some choppiness on the way. So all in all, the market is looking, I don't want to say iffy into next week, but with SPY, as we mentioned, we are right at the apex of that ascending wedge, and we'll just have to see what happens going into the week ahead. This is something that really stuck with me the first time I heard it. Remember, the market is the stock market is a market of stocks. Just because the markets are doing one thing doesn't mean individual stocks can't be doing something else. So always keep that in mind. Just because SPY, QQQ, some of these broad market ETFs and just indices in general are red doesn't necessarily mean every stock in the market's going to be red. So a shout out to JC Peretz for actually being the first person that really said that and made me think about that, because I always looked at the market. I'm like, well, the market's red, and the market may be red, but there's plenty of individual stocks that are probably performing well relative to the market. So always keep that in mind. These are the chart requests for this weekend. And thanks everybody for watching. Remember, if you do want to try out raindrops, if you want to try these sensitivity alerts out, the gap snake, remember we do have that 7-day free trial where you can sign up and try these things out before you buy. So if you have any questions, make sure to let us know either through our Twitter DM, or you can reach out to hello@trendspider.com, and our customer success team is always there to help. Everybody have a great rest of your Sunday. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next weekend.